The screen of my phone lit up against the dark wood of the nightstand. 79 missed calls. The numbers blurred together in a steady stream of incoming panic. My mother, my sister, my father. Unrecognized numbers that I knew belonged to desperate bridesmaids. It was 8 in the morning on a Saturday. Just across the state line in Maryland, my 29-year-old sister Vanessa was standing on the asphalt outside the towering, wrought-iron gates of the Whitehaven estate. She was wearing a custom-imported silk wedding gown, pounding her fists against the intercom speaker. The venue manager stood on the other side of the iron bars, holding a clipboard and maintaining a detached, professional posture. He had just handed my father a printed notice of default and breach of contract. The catering trucks were idling on the shoulder of the highway, preparing to turn around. The florist was locking the doors of their delivery van. The white peacocks Vanessa demanded for the lawn were being loaded back into their transport crates. My mother was leaving me her 14th voicemail, her voice cracking, begging me to fix this. She demanded I call the venue and force them to open the gates because family takes care of family. She had no idea that I was the one who instructed the manager to lock them out. Before I take you back to the kitchen table where this all began, let me ask you a question. How old were you when you realized your family valued your money more than they valued your presence? Drop your age in the comments. And make sure you subscribe to Grape Vengeance so you do not miss the fallout of this story. Now let me take you back 48 hours, to Thursday evening. The air inside my parents' colonial home in Wilmington, Delaware, always felt heavy. It smelled of lemon polish, expensive cigar smoke, and the faint metallic scent of baseboard heating. The house was designed to intimidate. Dark mahogany wainscoting lined the hallways, and a faux crystal chandelier hung suspended over a dining table that had not seen a family dinner in 5 years. To the neighbors in this manicured subdivision, Richard and Susan Palmer represented the pinnacle of old generational wealth. To me, a 34-year-old forensic auditor who reviewed corporate ledgers for a living, this real estate was a crumbling movie set. It was held together by leveraged home equity loans and a stack of unpaid contractor invoices hidden in my father's desk drawer. I sat at the kitchen island staring at a cream-colored envelope resting on the Calicotta marble. The cardstock was thick, bordered in gold foil. Vanessa kept her French manicured index finger pressed against the center of it. She pushed it 2 inches toward me. The paper made a sharp scratching sound against the stone. $35,000, Vanessa said. Her tone carried the airy, practiced cadence of a woman who spent her afternoons test-driving luxury sedans she could not finance. She did not ask. She stated the number as if reading a grocery list. That covers the bespoke catering and the floral overages, she continued, tapping the envelope. Pay it, Donatella, or do not bother showing up to my wedding on Saturday. I looked down at the gold foil lettering spelling out her name and Bradley Whitmore. I left my hands folded in my lap, feeling the cool air conditioning draft against my bare arms. Vanessa is under an immense amount of stress right now, my mother Susan murmured. Susan leaned against the stainless steel door of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. She drew a gray cashmere wrap tight over her shoulders, her knuckles turning white from the grip. She refused to meet my gaze, staring instead at the edge of the marble island. Bradley's family expects a certain standard, Susan said, her voice thin and tight. The Whitmores are established in local politics. We cannot look like we are cutting corners on the centerpieces. It reflects poorly on us. Then cut the guest list, I offered. I picked up my black coffee. The mug felt heavy in my hand, crafted from fine bone china. My parents owned a dozen of them. I knew for a fact they were purchased on a department store credit card carrying a 22% interest rate. My father stepped into the kitchen. Richard Palmer possessed the rigid, upright posture of a seasoned executive, a title he had not held in over a decade. He checked the time, adjusting his cuff and tapping the crystal of his gold watch. From a distance, the timepiece looked like a pristine luxury heirloom. Up close, the second hand ticked instead of sweeping smoothly. A replica, just like the fortune he pretended to wield. "Your sister is not cutting her guest list," Richard said. His voice dropped into the low, gravelly register he used to shut down negotiations. He walked over and stood behind Vanessa, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. They flanked her like bodyguards. "You are 34 years old." Richard continued staring down at me. "You sit in a little condo downtown, living off the scraps of the family trust while your sister secures our future. You observe this family." I set my coffee mug down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the marble countertop. The family trust. It was a ghost. A phantom ledger they used to keep Vanessa compliant and obedient. For a decade, my parents weaponized this trust, dangling an inheritance that had evaporated before Vanessa even graduated high school. Vanessa built her entire identity around being a wealthy heiress, an illusion my parents fought tooth and nail to maintain so she could marry into the Whitmore dynasty. They needed the Whitmore name to shield them from mounting creditors. They needed the illusion of wealth to survive. "The florist needs the wire transfer by Friday morning," Vanessa added. She crossed her arms, letting the 2-carat diamond on her left hand catch the recessed lighting. "If the funds are not in their account by noon, they pull the white peacocks from the lawn. I am not having a backyard barbecue wedding, Donatella. Pay your share." I studied the three of them. I let the silence stretch, watching their micro-expressions. My mother gripping her cashmere wrap, terrified of losing the Whitmore connection. My father hiding his financial panic behind a stern, authoritative glare. My sister demanding a ransom for a seat at a table I never cared to join. As a forensic auditor, I read people the way I read balance sheets. They needed me to physically write this check. The tight lines around Richard's eyes gave it away. If they possessed the liquidity, they would have paid the vendor themselves and lorded their generosity over me at the reception. They were tapped out. The bank accounts were dry. But more than that, the specific demand felt calculated. It felt like a cover-up. I stood up, pushing my stool back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I picked up my purse and looked down at the cream envelope, then back up at Vanessa's expectant face. She tilted her chin up, waiting for me to pull out my checkbook. She had spent her entire life getting exactly what she wanted by using our parents as leverage. "Enjoy your wedding, Vanessa," I said. My voice was flat. I did not raise it. I did not need to. I walked past my father, ignoring his stiffened shoulders, and headed for the front door. "Donatella!" My father barked, his voice echoing in the grand foyer. "You walk out that door and you are done. We will not save a seat for you." I pushed the heavy oak front door open and stepped out into the humid Delaware evening. The air felt thick, heavy with the threat of a summer storm. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my heels. I hit the ignition, and the engine turned over, breaking the quiet of the affluent neighborhood. I did not know the full extent of their desperation yet. But I knew my parents were just asked for money. They took it. And if they were resorting to verbal ultimatums over a kitchen island, it meant their usual pipelines had run dry. I pulled out of the driveway, my mind already shifting from daughter to auditor. I just needed to find out which pipeline they had tried to tap this time. The streetlights of Wilmington flickered past my windshield, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the leather interior of my car. My hands gripped the steering wheel, the smooth material grounding me as the adrenaline slowly ebbed, replaced by cold, clinical calculation. I watched the sprawling estates of my parents' neighborhood fade into the rearview mirror, giving way to the denser, more practical architecture of the city center. For 34 years, the division in the Palmer household had been clear and unyielding. Vanessa received the protection, The funding, the private school tuitions, and the endless stream of designer clothes required to attract a suitable husband. I received the discipline. I paid my own way through state college, built a career from the ground up, and spent my 20s quietly accumulating assets while they accumulated appearances. They told their country club friends I was the eccentric, independent daughter who chose a simple life. The truth was, I refused to play a role in their stage production. The demand for $35,000 gnawed at me. It was too specific. A caterer might demand a final balance, a florist might threaten to withhold centerpieces, but wrapping it all into a neat round number handed to me 48 hours before the ceremony meant something was bleeding out behind the scenes. Richard Palmer did not beg for money unless he was cornered. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my building, the tires squealing softly against the polished concrete. The air down here smelled of exhaust and damp cement, a stark contrast to the sterile, perfumed air of my parents' colonial home. I parked in my reserved spot, killed the engine, and sat in the silence for a moment. I am a silent partner in a luxury hospitality holding company. It is a fact I have kept carefully concealed from my family for 5 years. When you grow up surrounded by people who view financial stability as a communal resource to be plundered, you learn to hide your vaults. My wealth was quiet. Theirs was loud, hollow, and currently crashing down around them. I grabbed my purse, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button for the penthouse level. My mind sorted through the variables. If Richard and Susan were out of cash, and they could not secure a loan because their credit was drowning in debt, they had to have tried another route before attempting to extort me directly. They always took the path of least resistance first. The elevator doors slid open. I unlocked my door and stepped into the cool, dark sanctuary of my home. No fake chandeliers, no replica watches. Just floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline and a heavy oak desk in the corner where I kept my secure laptops. I dropped my keys on the console table. The metal clinked in the quiet room. I did not bother turning on the main lights. I walked straight to the desk, opened my primary workstation, and logged into my encrypted financial portal. It was time to pull the thread. It was time to see exactly how far my parents had gone to fund Vanessa's perfect day. The blue light from the monitor washed over my face. I typed the secondary authentication sequence into the terminal. The screen shifted, loading the primary dashboard of the Palmer Family Endowment. That was the official title. We just called it the trust. Rows of data cascaded down the display. I bypassed the dummy accounts my father set up to look impressive and dug straight into the root routing numbers. I had monitored these specific ledgers for 10 years. The trust was established by my paternal grandfather in the late 90s. It held real value once. But Richard and Susan liquidated the core assets during the real estate crash of 2008, funneling the capital into a series of disastrous speculative investments to save their country club status. The money evaporated. By the time I graduated high school, the accounts held nothing but dust and maintenance fees. My parents never confessed this insolvency. Instead, they weaponized the empty shell. They used the promise of a vast inheritance as a psychological leash to control their children. I walked away from the illusion at 18, taking out student loans and working double shifts. Vanessa swallowed the lie whole. She built her entire identity around being a wealthy heiress. She cultivated a persona demanding luxury because she believed a multi-million-dollar safety net waited for her on her 30th birthday. My parents encouraged this delusion. They groomed her to attract someone like Bradley Whitmore. A local politician's son required a bride with a pedigree. The Whitmores brought political clout, and the Palmers supposedly brought generational capital. The impending marriage was a merger built on a fabricated prospectus. If the Whitmores knew the Palmer estate was leveraged to the hilt, the engagement would shatter before the appetizers were served. That is what I stood to destroy. Their manufactured social standing hung by a thread, and that thread was currently tied to my bank account. My phone buzzed against the heavy oak wood of my desk. The vibration sounded sharp in the quiet room. The screen lit up with a notification from a new group chat. Susan had just created a thread titled Palmer Family Updates. She added 20 extended relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins who lived out of state but thrived on local gossip. I unlocked the device and read the opening message. My mother had crafted a masterpiece of character assassination. Family, Susan wrote, her digital tone dripping with manufactured sorrow. I am heartbroken to share that Donatella will likely not be attending the ceremony this Saturday. We invited her over tonight to discuss the final joyous details, but she threw a jealous tantrum. She is harboring deep resentment over her sister's happiness and refused to participate in the celebration. Please keep Vanessa in your prayers. She is devastated that her own sister cannot put aside her bitterness for one weekend. My thumb hovered over the screen. The audacity was staggering, yet entirely predictable. Susan did not just want to exclude me. She needed to control the narrative of my absence. If I did not show up, the Whitmores would ask questions. By painting me as a bitter, unstable spinster jealous of the radiant bride, my mother preemptively discredited anything I might say later. The replies flooded in instantly. The phone vibrated in rapid succession, a physical manifestation of their collective judgment. Aunt Barbara sent a frowning emoji, followed by a paragraph. I am so sorry, Susan. Donatella always had a chip on her shoulder. Vanessa deserves a perfect day without that dark cloud hanging over her. Uncle David chimed in next. Unbelievable. Send Vanessa our love. We will make up for her selfish behavior on the dance floor. My cousin Jessica, who was currently serving as a bridesmaid and hoping to network with Bradley's affluent groomsmen, added a quick note. We are ignoring the negativity. The bride is our only focus. Do not let her ruin this for you. I read every single message. I did not type a defense. I did not argue. Arguing implied their opinions held weight. I took a screenshot of the entire thread and filed the images into a secure folder on my cloud drive. The digital echo chamber of enablers worked exactly as my father designed it. They isolated the target, applied social pressure, and waited for the target to break and beg for readmittance to the circle. I set the phone face down on the desk. My gaze drifted to the corner of the workspace. A small silver frame stood next to my keyboard. It held a faded childhood photograph taken at a public park. I was 10 and Vanessa was 5. We were eating melting popsicles, our faces sticky, wearing cheap cotton t-shirts. My father was in the background, laughing genuinely, wearing an unbranded baseball cap. It was the last summer before my grandfather passed away and left them the trust. It was the last time we were a normal family before the money mutated their priorities and before the loss of that money turned them into predators. The faded ink of the photograph provided a harsh contrast to the glossy fake reality they broadcasted to the Whitmores. They traded authentic joy for a counterfeit country club membership. I traced the edge of the silver frame with my index finger. I was not a trust fund leech, and I was not a bitter spinster. I was a senior forensic auditor. I spent my days tracing hidden offshore accounts for corporate litigators. Beyond that, I had spent the last 5 years quietly building my own empire. I was a silent partner in a luxury hospitality holding company. I owned assets they could not even fathom. I understood the architecture of wealth, and I understood exactly how to dismantle a financial facade. My parents thought they were punishing me by cutting me out of the wedding. They believed they held the high ground, but standing on a mountain of debt only made the fall harder. I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors. The emotional manipulation was just static. The real story always lived in the numbers. I pulled up the transactional history for Richard's primary checking account. The ledger showed a series of overdraft fees spanning the last 6 months. They were bleeding cash just to keep the lights on in that sprawling colonial house. I cross-referenced the dates with Vanessa's wedding planning timeline. Every time a vendor deposit was due, my father secured a high-interest microloan to cover it. The desperation was palpable in the data. But microloans would not cover $35,000 for bespoke catering and imported white peacocks. They needed a lump sum. I navigated to the credit inquiry section of their portfolio. I had flagged my own social security number years ago, a standard precaution for someone in my line of work. A glaring red alert flashed across the screen. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the timestamp. Tuesday afternoon, 2 days before the kitchen table ultimatum. Someone had attempted to initiate a wire transfer for $35,000. The destination account belonged to a premier event planning agency. The origin account was not Richard's checking. It was a dormant, high-yield line of credit. A line of credit attached directly to my name. The air in the condo felt suddenly thin. My heart rate stayed steady, but a cold realization settled into my chest. This was not a simple shakedown. My parents had not summoned me to that marble island merely to demand my capital. They summoned me because their attempt to steal it had failed. I had frozen that specific credit line 3 months ago during a routine security sweep. The bank rejected their fraudulent wire transfer. They realized they could not forge my authorization, so they pivoted to extortion. They needed me to willingly hand over a cashier's check to cover the tracks of their attempted felony. My phone vibrated again. A direct email notification. I switched tabs and opened my inbox. The sender address belonged to Vanessa's wedding planner. The subject line read, "Urgent, final payment required." Susan was copied on the correspondence. I opened the message. The planner stated that the venue was threatening to cancel the reservation if the final balance was not settled immediately. I read the name of the venue in the second paragraph. My breath hitched. The Whitehaven Estate. I stared at the glowing letters on the screen. The universe possessed a profound, ruthless sense of timing. I reached for my encrypted corporate phone, preparing to call my business partner. The stakes had just escalated far beyond a stolen line of credit. My sister was about to learn a very hard lesson about who really owned the keys to the castle. The encrypted phone felt cold against my ear. It rang twice before Marcus, my silent business partner, answered. His voice was crisp and alert, cutting through the late-night quiet of my condo. "We closed on the Maryland property 14 days ago, correct?" I asked, bypassing any standard greeting. "The Whitehaven estate is officially ours," Marcus confirmed. The sound of a mechanical keyboard clacking echoed in the background. "The deed transferred. Escrow cleared. We hold the keys. Why do you ask?" I stared at the glowing email from the wedding planner on my secondary monitor. The letters seemed to vibrate against the harsh white background of the inbox. "Send me the current accounts receivable ledger for upcoming events I instructed. Pull the schedule specifically for this weekend." While waiting for his file transfer, I clicked back to the banking alert regarding my frozen credit line. I needed to document the exact anatomy of the crime. I initiated a metadata extraction on the rejected wire transfer request. My parents did not just walk into a local branch and forge a slip. They attempted this breach online. The banking security system logged the origin IP address of the failed transaction. I ran the numerical string through a basic geographic traceroute protocol. The coordinates pinged directly to the local service provider routing hub. The account matched the fiber optic billing address from my parents' colonial home. I did not stop there. I pulled the device identifier log. The fraudulent request originated from a desktop running an outdated operating system. It was the exact machine Richard kept in his mahogany-paneled home office. The gravity of the discovery settled over me like a heavy winter coat. This was not a petty familial dispute. Under federal statute, this constituted wire fraud. They attempted to illegally extract capital across state lines. The kitchen table ultimatum I had just endured was nothing more than a panicked cover-up. If I yielded and wrote that $35,000 check, they could claim the rejected digital transfer was a simple error, a clerical mistake previously authorized by me. They needed my physical signature on a tangible bank draft to legitimize their cyber theft. They were using my sister's wedding as a shield against federal prosecution. The email thread on my monitor refreshed automatically. Jillian, the premier event coordinator, sent a highly stressed follow-up message. Donatella, your mother indicated you would be assuming responsibility for this outstanding balance. The Whitehaven management team is threatening to void the contract within 24 hours. Please advise immediately so we can prevent a catastrophic cancellation. Susan replied all to the chain, her message appearing less than a minute later. Donatella, darling, do not let your stubbornness ruin your sister's milestone. Transfer the funds tonight. We are counting on you. I leaned back in my leather chair. The material creaked softly in the silent room. The sheer entitlement hung thick in the digital space. They were trying to publicly shame me into paying a ransom to a corporate entity they did not realize I owned. A secure notification chimed. Marcus sent the encrypted Whitehaven ledger. I unzipped the file and scrolled down to the Saturday event schedule. There it was, sitting at the top of the queue. Client, Vanessa Palmer. Groom, Bradley Whitmore. I opened the attached digital copy of the signed venue contract. My eyes scanned the itemized billing list. The base rental for the 18th century waterfront mansion was $40,000. But Vanessa had appended a sprawling, exorbitant addendum. She demanded custom imported hydrangeas lining every walkway. She booked a string quartet to be stationed in the topiary gardens. I spotted the ridiculous rider she had bragged about, a demand for a flock of live white peacocks to roam the south lawn during the cocktail hour. The total invoice was staggering. The final balance due was $75,000. According to the timestamp on the ledger, she was already past the 72-hour grace period. I studied the electronic signature on the bottom line. Vanessa had signed it. Richard was listed as the secondary financial guarantor. They were legally bound to a contract they could never honor, signed with a holding company they did not know I controlled. Marcus, I said into the receiver. I see it, he replied. I can hear him reading the same ledger on his end. Palmer wedding. Payment is highly delinquent. The estate management team is asking how to proceed. Standard protocol allows a bit of leniency if the client has a verifiable portfolio and a strong social standing. No leniency, I instructed. My voice was steady, void of any familial hesitation or warmth. Enforce the zero-tolerance default clause. If the wire does not clear by the exact hour stipulated in the contract, lock the gates. Do not inform them of the cancellation until they arrive on the property. Understood. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second. Are you sure that is a high-profile local political family on the groom's side? I am sure. Apply the rules strictly by the book. Let the contract dictate the outcome. I ended the call and set the device face down on the desk. The strategy was set. The trap was armed. My family believed they were playing chess against an isolated, powerless outcast. They did not realize the outcast owned the board they were standing on. I turned my attention back to the planner's email. If I ignored it, Susan would escalate the smear campaign in the family group chat. I needed to respond in a way that offered no financial relief, but provided enough ambiguity to keep them dangling on the hook. I typed a brief, sterile reply. Jillian, I am not a party to this contract. Any outstanding balances remain the sole responsibility of the signatories. Direct all collections to Richard and Vanessa Palmer. I hit send. The finality of the action felt like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. The server processed the outgoing mail, sealing their fate. A new text message appeared on my personal phone. It was from Vanessa. Mom forwarded your email to me. You are pathetic. You really want to play games right now? See you at the bridal shower tomorrow. Bring your checkbook. I read her words twice. The bridal shower. It was scheduled for noon at the Wilmington Country Club. A gathering of 70 affluent women sipping expensive mimosas and praising a bride who was currently insolvent. Vanessa thought she could use public pressure in a room full of local socialites to force my compliance. She intended to ambush me, where I could not easily walk away without causing a scene. She wanted to use the Whitmore matriarchs as an audience to humiliate me into submission. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights of downtown Wilmington glittered below, a grid of amber and white cutting through the dark, humid night. The reflection of my face in the glass showed no anxiety, only sharp, predatory focus. Let her try. I spent the next 2 hours securing my perimeter. I contacted my primary banking institution and elevated the security protocols on all my accounts, personal and corporate. I initiated a formal fraud inquiry regarding the rejected wire transfer, ensuring a rigid paper trail existed in case Richard attempted to forge my signature elsewhere. I locked down every financial avenue they could possibly exploit. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of iced water. The ice clinked softly against the crystal rim. The physical sensation grounded me in the present moment. For years I had tolerated their subtle verbal jabs, their exclusionary tactics, their quiet insistence that I was a secondary citizen in my own bloodline. The kitchen table ultimatum was the catalyst I needed to stop observing and start dismantling. Tomorrow at the country club, they would deploy every psychological weapon in their arsenal. Fake tears, whispered gossip, thinly veiled threats of excommunication from the family tree. They would try to corner me near the gift table and break my resolve. I needed to dress the part of the defeated, reluctant sister. I needed them to believe their extortion was working right up until the moment the heavy iron gates of Whitehaven slammed shut in their faces. I walked to my closet and selected a muted, understated navy dress for the shower. It was the armor of someone who knew exactly how to become invisible while holding all the cards. The tension in the air was thick, heavy with the impending collision. They wanted a show. I would give them one. Morning sunlight pierced the floor-to-ceiling windows of my condo, casting sharp, geometric shadows across the hardwood floor. I stood by the kitchen island, holding a fresh cup of espresso. The ceramic was warm against my palms. I set the cup down and unlocked my secondary secure terminal. The screen booted up, displaying the internal operating system for Apex Hospitality Group. I navigated to the newly acquired property files. The Whitehaven estate portfolio loaded instantly. The high-resolution aerial photographs showcased 300 acres of pristine Maryland coastline. The main structure was an 18th-century waterfront mansion built from imported limestone. It featured marble colonnades, expansive topiary gardens, and a grand ballroom overlooking the Atlantic. It was the crown jewel of the Eastern Seaboard luxury wedding industry. My firm had quietly finalized the acquisition exactly 14 days ago. Vanessa had no idea she was renting her dream venue from the sister she just tried to extort. I opened the specific ledger for her event. The numbers stared back at me in stark, unforgiving black text. The final balance of $75,000 remained unpaid. The grace period expired at exactly noon today. The encrypted phone on my desk chimed. The caller ID displayed the name Sterling. He served as the on-site general manager for Whitehaven, a seasoned professional who managed high-net-worth clients with flawless discretion. I pressed the answer button. "We have a situation with the Palmer event," Sterling said. His voice echoed slightly, indicating he was walking through the empty grand ballroom. The event coordinator, Jillian, just called the office in a panic. She tried to authorize a partial credit card payment for $5,000 to hold the reservation. The card was declined. I took a sip of my espresso. The bitter taste grounded my focus. "Did you inform her of the impending cancellation?" I asked. "I did," Sterling replied. He paused, the sound of his footsteps halting. Then she put Bradley Whitmore on the line. The groom. He invoked his father's political office. He stated that the Whitmore family expects the gates to remain open and the vendors to be granted full access tomorrow morning, regardless of the billing status. He threatened to have city inspectors audit our permits if we disrupt the ceremony. The sheer entitlement radiated through the phone receiver. Bradley Whitmore believed his local political connections granted him immunity from basic financial obligations. He thought he could bully a hospitality vendor into hosting a luxury event for free. Sterling cleared his throat. "Do you want me to extend the deadline?" he asked. "The Whitmores have significant influence in this county. It might be prudent to avoid a public relations incident during our first month of ownership." My grip tightened around the espresso cup. "We do not bow to municipal politicians," I instructed. My voice remained steady and cold. "The contract is legally binding. No funds, no entry. Inform Jillian that partial payments are unacceptable. If the full wire transfer does not clear our accounts by noon, you are to lock the wrought iron gates." "Understood," Sterling said. I could hear the relief in his tone. He preferred strict adherence to the rules. "Hire private security for tomorrow morning," I added. "Place 2 guards at the main entrance. When the wedding party arrives, you will hand them the printed notice of default. Do not engage in negotiations. If they refuse to leave the shoulder of the highway, call the local authorities and have them cited for trespassing." I ended the call and placed the phone back on its charging dock. The corporate machinery was now fully locked into place. The trap was set. A sharp buzz from the lobby intercom interrupted the silence. I walked over and pressed the audio feed. The concierge informed me a legal courier was waiting downstairs with a package requiring my direct signature. I authorized the elevator access. A few minutes later, I opened my front door. A man in a gray uniform handed me a thick manila envelope and a digital signing pad. I scrawled my name, took the parcel, and locked the door. The return address belonged to my father's corporate attorney. I tore the heavy paper open. A stack of legal documents slid out onto my desk. I scanned the top sheet. It was a formal waiver of beneficiary rights. Richard was attempting to secure a predatory bridge loan from a high-risk private lender. He intended to use the defunct family trust as collateral to borrow enough cash to pay the Whitehaven invoice. The lender required my signature to subordinate my legal standing as a beneficiary, effectively signing away any remaining protections on the estate. They were frantic. They were searching beneath the floorboards for loose change, trying to bridge the $75,000 gap before the venue canceled the event. And once again, their survival required my willing participation. I picked up a heavy fountain pen. The gold nib glinted under the desk lamp. I did not consult a lawyer. I did not call my father to argue. I drew a single thick black line diagonally across the signature block. At the top of the page, I wrote the word "denied" in large, unmistakable print. I folded the documents, shoved them into the prepaid return envelope, and sealed the flap. I would drop it in the outgoing mail slot on my way out. Richard would receive the rejection notice on Monday, long after the wedding imploded. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:30 in the morning. The bridal shower commenced at noon. I walked into my bedroom and changed into the navy dress I selected the night before. The fabric was tailored conservative and projected an image of quiet submission. I pinned my hair back into a severe knot. I applied minimal makeup. I needed to look like a woman who felt the weight of her family's disapproval. I needed them to believe their psychological warfare was highly effective. I picked up my leather handbag and walked out of the condo. The drive to the Wilmington Country Club took 20 minutes. The route wound through the wealthy suburbs, past sprawling golf courses and gated driveways. The sky above was a pale, cloudless blue, offering no hint of the storm about to hit the Palmer family. I turned onto the long, sweeping driveway of the country club. The manicured lawns stretched out in perfect green grids. Valets in crisp white shirts darted between luxury SUVs and imported sports cars. The parking lot was a visual roster of the local elite. The Whitmores and their political allies occupied the premier parking spots near the entrance. I handed my keys to a young valet and stepped onto the brick pathway. The air smelled of expensive perfume and freshly cut grass. I could hear the faint sound of a harp playing from the outdoor terrace. I pushed open the heavy glass double doors and entered the grand foyer. The lobby was lined with floral arrangements featuring the same imported white hydrangeas Vanessa demanded for her venue. The country club general manager directed me toward the private ballroom. 70 affluent women sat at circular tables draped in pink silk. Waitstaff navigated the room carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of champagne and miniature crab cakes. The volume of the room was a steady, deafening hum of practiced socialite chatter. I scanned the crowd. Vanessa sat at the head table, wearing a white designer cocktail dress, flanked by Bradley's mother and 2 state senators' wives. She laughed at a joke, her head thrown back, projecting the image of a carefree, wealthy bride. Susan stood near the gift table, greeting guests with a tight, radiant smile. She spotted me standing in the doorway. Her smile vanished, her eyes hardened into dark, calculating slits. She whispered something to the woman next to her, set her champagne flute down on a passing tray, and began marching across the patterned carpet directly toward me. The trap was closing, but my mother did not realize she was the one stepping into it. I took a slow, deep breath, adjusted the strap of my handbag, and prepared to play the victim. The clatter of silverware against china provided a constant, irritating soundtrack to my table assignment. Susan closed the distance between us in 4 brisk strides the moment I entered the grand foyer. She did not offer a hug or a polite greeting. Her manicured fingers clamped down on my elbow, the acrylic nails biting slightly into the fabric of my navy sleeve. She steered me away from the floral entrance displays and toward the gold-framed seating chart resting on a wooden easel. "Table 14, my mother muttered. Her voice pitched low so the passing waiters could not hear. "Do not hover around the Whitmore family. We need everything to flow seamlessly today. Do not cause a disruption." She released my arm and turned back to greet a local judge's wife, her tight, radiant smile reappearing instantly. I walked past the center displays and navigated the crowded ballroom. The tables were numbered sequentially, radiating outward from the bridal dais. Table 14 sat in the furthest, darkest corner of the room, jammed uncomfortably close to the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. I took my assigned seat. The chair wobbled on an uneven patch of carpet. Every 30 seconds, the heavy doors swung open, unleashing a cacophony of shouting line cooks, followed by the pungent smell of industrial dish soap mixed with roasted garlic. My table mates consisted of elderly neighbors who rarely left their homes, and a few distant acquaintances Susan felt obligated to invite, but deemed too unpolished for the central tables. They sipped their lukewarm water and exchanged strained pleasantries. I kept my posture relaxed, observing the spectacle from the shadows. At the front of the room, Vanessa held court. She sat on a plush velvet love seat raised on a temporary stage. Pyramids of wrapped boxes surrounded her. She tore into silver wrapping paper, holding up crystal vases and imported silk robes for the photographer to capture. Bradley's mother, Eleanor Whitmore, sat to her right, nodding with quiet approval. The entire production was a masterclass in deception. Vanessa played the role of the carefree, affluent bride flawlessly, while the financial foundation beneath her chair crumbled into dust. I checked my watch. 1:15 in the afternoon. The dessert plates were being cleared. It was time for the ambush. Across the room, Vanessa made eye contact with Susan. The bride stood up, smoothing the skirt of her white cocktail dress, and leaned down to whisper something into her future mother-in-law's ear. She stepped off the dais and headed toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. Susan waited 10 seconds, then followed the same path. I counted to 30. I placed my linen napkin on the table, pushed back my wobbly chair, and walked out of the ballroom. The hallway was quiet, lined with dark wood paneling and oil paintings of former club presidents. I pushed open the heavy mahogany door marked with a brass plaque for the ladies' lounge. The country club powder room was an expansive chamber of pink granite countertops and floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Crystal sconces provided a soft, flattering glow. Vanessa stood at the furthest sink, applying a fresh coat of rose-colored gloss to her lips. Susan stood near the door, her arms crossed over her chest, guarding the exit. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing the three of us inside the quiet, perfumed space. "Did you bring it?" Vanessa asked. She did not turn around, speaking to my reflection in the mirror instead. I stopped near the center of the room. "Bring what?" Vanessa capped her lip gloss and turned around. "The check, Donatella. Do not play stupid. We told you the vendor requires the wire transfer by tomorrow morning. I expect you brought the draft today." I kept my expression neutral, letting my shoulders slump a fraction of an inch. "I am not writing a check for $35,000 to pay for your centerpieces." Vanessa let out a sharp, mocking laugh. It echoed off the granite walls. "You really think you have a choice here? Look at you. You wear cheap navy polyester to a luxury event. You sit in a dark condo punching numbers into a spreadsheet all day. You are a glorified calculator. You produce nothing of social value. The least you can do is contribute your hoarded salary to the people who actually elevate this family name." Her insults lacked creativity, relying on the same tired classist tropes she absorbed from our parents. I looked at Susan. My mother stepped away from the door, moving closer to me. Her face was a mask of cold determination. "This is not a negotiation," Susan stated. Her voice was devoid of any maternal warmth. "The deadline is Friday at noon. If the funds are not secured in our account by that exact hour, you will suffer the consequences." I tilted my head, feigning apprehension. "What consequences?" "You will be formally disowned," Susan declared. "You will be barred from attending the ceremony. The security guards will have a photograph of your face. You will be escorted off the premises if you even try to park your car. Furthermore, your father and I will contact our attorney on Monday morning. We will cut you out of the will entirely. You will not see a single dime of the Palmer estate." The irony was exquisite. She threatened to sever my access to a will that contained nothing but outstanding debts and leveraged assets. They were holding a toxic, radioactive liability over my head, pretending it was a brick of solid gold. Before I could formulate a response, the brass handle of the bathroom door turned. The heavy mahogany swung open. Cousin Melanie froze in the doorway. She was a quiet 22-year-old graduate student who rarely spoke at family gatherings. She stood there, holding her small clutch purse, her eyes darting between my mother's rigid posture and Vanessa's cruel sneer. The silence in the room became sharp enough to draw blood. Melanie had clearly heard the end of the threat. She heard the word disowned ringing in the granite chamber. Melanie swallowed hard. Her cheeks flushed a deep, uncomfortable crimson. She averted her eyes, staring intently at the geometric tiles on the floor. She hurried past us, scurrying into the farthest bathroom stall and locking the metal door with a loud, frantic click. The interruption provided the perfect moment for my performance. I let my breathing quicken slightly. I looked down at my hands, studying my unpainted fingernails. I needed them to believe the threat of losing the mythical inheritance terrified me. I needed them to think the public humiliation had broken my resolve. "I understand," I whispered. My voice trembled just enough to sell the lie. "I understand my place in this family." Susan uncrossed her arms. Her shoulders relaxed, a triumphant gleam settling into her eyes. She mistook my calculated calm for total submission. She believed she had successfully bullied her rogue daughter back into the designated corral. "We knew you would see reason," Susan said, her tone shifting back to the faux sweetness she used on the country club waiters. "Have the funds ready by tomorrow." Vanessa picked up her designer clutch from the counter. "Do not be late, Donatella. I do not have time for banking errors on the eve of my wedding." The bride marched past me, enveloped in a cloud of expensive floral perfume. Susan followed closely behind, pausing only to give me a condescending pat on the shoulder. The gesture felt like a physical brand. The door swung shut, leaving me alone in the silent, gleaming powder room, with the faint sound of Cousin Melanie washing her hands in the corner. I looked at my reflection in the vast mirror. The false anxiety drained from my face, replaced by a cold predator's stillness. The psychological warfare was over. They fired their best shots, utilizing shame, isolation, and empty threats of financial ruin. They believed they won the war in this bathroom. I walked out of the country club without returning to table 14. I did not say goodbye to the guests. I handed my ticket to the valet, tipped him in cash, and climbed into the driver's seat of my car. The financial trap was now fully primed and set. They issued their ultimate deadline, Friday at noon. They gave me the exact hour they expected to receive their salvation. Instead, Friday at noon would become the precise moment their entire fabricated universe shattered. The countdown had officially begun. I pulled out of the sweeping driveway, merging onto the highway, calculating every move I would make over the next 24 hours. The hum of the vehicle engine provided a steady counterpoint to my thoughts as I navigated back toward downtown Wilmington. The late afternoon sun cast long, fractured shadows across the dashboard. I parked in the subterranean garage, rode the elevator up to the penthouse, and entered the quiet perimeter of my home. The silence inside felt earned, a stark contrast to the performative noise of the country club. I walked directly to the kitchen, poured a glass of cold sparkling water, and set my handbag on the counter. Before I could even take a sip, my personal phone began to vibrate violently against the stone surface. A continuous stream of incoming message alerts chimed in rapid succession. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. My father had just established a brand new digital battleground. A 20-person group chat, populated exclusively by our extended relatives, was suddenly live, bearing a title designed to draw immediate attention. Palmer Family Accountability. Richard had wasted no time executing the next phase of their retaliatory strategy. I scrolled through the rapidly accumulating text log. My father initiated the dialogue with a carefully crafted manifesto. "It breaks my heart to inform everyone that Donatella has chosen to actively sabotage her sister on the eve of her wedding," Richard wrote, his tone dripping with theatrical disappointment. "Despite our endless sacrifices, she refuses to uphold basic family values or honor her financial commitments to Vanessa. We are dealing with an adult child driven by pure malice and jealousy. Please keep us in your thoughts as we navigate her selfish betrayal." The response from the Enabler Network was instantaneous. Aunt Barbara fired off the first supporting volley within seconds. "Unforgivable behavior," Barbara typed, punctuating her disgust with a furious emoji. "I always knew she lacked the moral compass of her sister. She needs to grow up and pay what she owes, immediately." "Stop being so bitter, Donatella, and support your flesh and blood." Uncle David chimed in next, adding fuel to the digital fire. "Absolute shame. If I acted this way toward my siblings, my parents would have disowned me decades ago. Richard and Susan have been far too lenient with her. Do the right thing and send the funds." Cousin Tyler joined the chorus, followed by several aunts I rarely spoke to. The messages poured in continuously, forming a toxic echo chamber of unsolicited judgment, demands for compliance, and thinly veiled threats of total familial excommunication. They operated as a synchronized unit, programmed to protect the family brand at all costs, while tearing down anyone who dared expose the rot beneath the surface. I did not type a single word in defense. I did not engage in the toxic mudslinging. Instead, I systematically screenshotted every single message, capturing the timestamps the sender handles and the aggressive phrasing. I organized the image files into a dedicated digital folder labeled Hostile Correspondence. In any future legal proceeding concerning defamation, harassment, or tortious interference, this comprehensive archive would serve as pristine evidence of their coordinated smear campaign. Let them build their public case against me. Every hostile word they typed only fortified my legal position. I tossed the phone onto the sofa and strode over to my workstation. The corporate laptop hummed to life as I opened an encrypted channel to my lead legal counsel, a sharp, unyielding corporate litigator named Harrison. Harrison accepted the video transmission almost immediately, his face appearing on screen against the backdrop of his Philadelphia office. "Good afternoon," Donatella Harrison said, adjusting his spectacles. "I assume this call relates to the Maryland hospitality acquisition?" "It does," I replied, keeping my tone strictly professional. "I need an absolute, watertight legal barrier erected between my personal identity and the corporate enforcement mechanisms of the Whitehaven estate. I want to ensure that when the default clauses are triggered this week, my family cannot legally pierce the corporate veil, claim a personal vendetta, or sue me individually for breach of contract." Harrison nodded, his fingers flying across his keyboard to pull up our holding company architecture. "A smart precaution. Given that your maiden name matches the defaulting client, they might attempt a desperate bad faith lawsuit alleging personal bias or tortious interference. Let us review the subsidiary layers." For the next 45 minutes, we meticulously audited every operational clause, indemnity form, and enforcement protocol governing the estate. We ensured that all cancellation notices, default triggers, and financial penalties would be dispatched exclusively through Apex Hospitality Group LLC, signed by the third-party general manager, Sterling. My name would remain completely detached from the daily correspondence. When the administrative hammer finally descended on Vanessa and Richard, it would land with the cold, impersonal weight of a corporate entity enforcing a standard business contract, leaving zero room for claims of targeted familial malice. Satisfied that our legal armor was impenetrable, I terminated the secure call and leaned back in my chair. The calendar on my screen ticked forward, marking the arrival of Wednesday. The tension in the atmosphere ratcheted up another notch. Vanessa's final grace period for the $75,000 venue balance was now exactly 48 hours away. 2 short days. 48 hours of remaining bliss before the financial reality of her situation came crashing down around her. Down in Wilmington, my sister likely spent her Wednesday morning attending dress fittings, finalizing seating charts, and basking in the warm glow of impending luxury. She still believed she held the upper hand. She remained utterly oblivious to the massive, invisible corporate machinery quietly locking into place around her, tightening its grip with every passing hour. She thought the world revolved around her wedding day, unaware that the physical location of that celebration was controlled by the very sister she had spent a lifetime treating like an invisible servant. I closed my laptop and walked out onto the balcony, looking out over the city. The afternoon breeze carried the distant sounds of urban traffic. The countdown clock was ticking down rapidly. Friday at noon was approaching, bringing with it an unyielding collision between illusion and absolute reality. The coastal fog pressed against the glass of my living room windows, muting the Thursday morning sunlight into a dull gray haze. I sat at my workstation with a fresh cup of green tea. The steam curled upward, disappearing into the cool air of the condo. Today required surgical precision. It was time to execute my first offensive maneuver. For 10 years, I had maintained a hidden financial safety net for my parents. It began during my early 20s as a simple joint checking account, established to help them manage a temporary medical debt they claimed was overwhelming their cash flow. I wanted to be a supportive daughter. I deposited a portion of my early salary to keep them afloat. But temporary assistance quickly morphed into a permanent lifestyle subsidy. Over the years, Richard convinced me to attach a high-limit platinum credit card to my primary profile, citing the need for an emergency revolving credit line for property maintenance. I allowed the accounts to remain active out of a misplaced sense of duty. I monitored the balances from afar, quietly covering the interest payments while my father used the plastic to lease imported vehicles and pay his exorbitant monthly country club dues. They treated my credit score like a limitless communal resource. That sense of duty officially expired yesterday in the country club powder room. I logged into the central banking portal. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the practiced, rhythmic speed of a forensic auditor locking down a compromised network. I navigated to the Authorized User tab. My father's name sat at the top of the directory, holding unrestricted access to a line of credit with a ceiling of $50,000. I moved the cursor over the revocation icon and clicked. The system prompted for a secondary security confirmation. I typed the sequence and hit enter. The digital link severed instantly. I repeated the process for the joint checking ledger. I transferred the remaining liquid assets funds I had personally earned and deposited into a secure, isolated trust under my sole proprietary control. I zeroed out the balances. I locked the routing numbers. The illicit credit pipeline was now permanently sealed. Richard was a creature of habit. Thursday mornings were designated for his luxury errands. He liked to visit the bespoke boutiques downtown before the crowds arrived. He enjoyed projecting the image of a titan of industry with endless leisure time and boundless capital. I knew his routine. He would walk into a high-end establishment, accept a complimentary espresso from a fawning sales associate, and casually drop that platinum card onto a glass display counter. I knew it was only a matter of time before he attempted to swipe it. At 10:45, my phone began to buzz. The device vibrated harshly against the polished wood of my desk. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I let it ring 3 times, allowing his anxiety to peak before I finally picked up the receiver. "Hello, Richard," I said. My voice was calm, flat, and devoid of any familial warmth. The background noise on his end featured the distinct, sophisticated sound of instrumental jazz and the quiet murmur of retail negotiations. He was standing inside a luxury jewelry boutique. His voice came through tight-clipped and laced with barely concealed panic. He was whispering harshly to avoid alerting the sales associate standing nearby. "Donatella, what is going on with the primary card?" he demanded. "The terminal just declined my purchase. The machine rejected it twice. Call the banking concierge and authorize the transaction right now." "What are you attempting to purchase?" I asked, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. "That is none of your business," he snapped, his breathing shallow and rapid. "It is a wedding present for your sister, a diamond tennis bracelet. The jeweler is waiting with the wrapped box. Fix the hold on the account. You are embarrassing me." I took a slow sip of my tea. The warmth of the liquid contrasted sharply with the ice in my veins. I pictured him, standing there, in his tailored suit, sweating under the recessed lighting of the jewelry store, staring at a useless piece of plastic. "I cannot authorize the transaction," Richard, I replied. "That card is no longer active." He fell silent for 3 full seconds. The soft jazz continued playing in his background. A sales associate asked if he needed another espresso. He waved the person away. "What do you mean it is no longer active?" he hissed. "I am restructuring my personal finances," I explained, keeping my tone casual and entirely detached. "I closed the joint accounts this morning. I revoked all authorized users. I zeroed out the checking ledger. The credit pipeline is shut down." "You cannot do that. he stammered, his voice rising a fraction before he caught himself and lowered it again. Turn it back on. I am standing in front of the regional manager. I have been a patron here for a decade. You are humiliating me. I am simply following the new family dynamic, I said. You and Susan made your parameters very clear. You issued a formal ultimatum. If I do not surrender my capital by Friday, I am disowned. I am barred from the wedding. I am cut out of the family. I spent the night reflecting on your terms, and I accept them. We were just angry, Richard pleaded. The authoritative executive persona dissolved into raw, unvarnished desperation. The realization of his profound vulnerability crashed over him in real time. We were stressed about the venue billing. Do not be irrational, Donatella. I am being highly rational, I stated. The real-world consequences of their arrogance were finally catching up to them. If I am no longer part of this family, I am no longer subsidizing this family. My financial ties to the Palmer household are officially severed. Find another way to buy the tennis bracelet. And find another way to pay for the white peacocks. Donatello, wait, he urged, his voice cracking. Let us discuss this. I can talk to Vanessa. We can make a compromise. I can smooth things over. Just unlock the card so I can leave this store with my dignity. I did not let him finish the negotiation. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red icon. The call disconnected. I set the device down on the desk. He was currently trapped in a high-end boutique, forced to explain to a regional manager why the wealthy patriarch of the Palmer family could not afford a piece of jewelry. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The silence in my condo lasted for less than 2 minutes. A sharp, high-pitched notification sounded from my secondary monitor. I turned my chair to face the corporate terminal. The Apex Hospitality automated billing system was running its scheduled morning sweep for delinquent accounts. A new line of code appeared in the outgoing communication log. The server had just generated and dispatched a formal electronic notice to the client on file for the Whitehaven estate. I opened the sent folder to review the dispatch. The document was addressed directly to Vanessa, with her wedding planner copied on the correspondence. The subject line read, Final Notice of Impending Default. The text inside was sterile, legally binding, and ruthlessly clear. The venue management informed the bride that she had exactly 24 hours remaining to wire the $75,000 balance. If the funds were not secured in the holding company accounts by Friday at noon, her reservation would be permanently canceled. Her vendor access codes would be disabled. The gates would remain locked. The jaws of the trap were snapping shut. The timing was impeccable. Vanessa would receive that critical email at the exact same moment our father walked out of the jeweler, empty-handed. The walls were closing in on them from both sides, and neither of them possessed the resources or the leverage to stop the crushing pressure. The countdown had entered its final, most destructive phase, and they were entirely on their own. Friday morning arrived with a heavy, oppressive humidity that clung to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my condo. The digital clock on my desk glowed, reading 11:15. 24 hours remained until Vanessa was scheduled to walk down the aisle. The condo was silent, save for the faint hum of the central air conditioning unit, working to keep the dampness at bay. The phone rang. The caller ID displayed my mother's cell number. I let it chime twice before tapping the screen to accept the connection. Donatella Susan began. Her tone was strained, coated in a thin layer of forced diplomacy that failed to mask the underlying panic. Your father and I had a very long discussion last night. We are willing to extend an olive branch. An olive branch, I repeated, keeping my voice level. Yes, Susan said, her breathing shallow. We understand tensions ran high earlier this week. We want to be reasonable. If you wire $20,000 to our account by noon today, we will allow you to attend the ceremony tomorrow. You can sit in the third row. However, you will need to leave before the reception begins. The seating chart for the dinner is already finalized, and we cannot make adjustments for late additions." The audacity of the proposal was staggering. She was bartering a partial invitation. Susan lacked $75,000 for the venue her husband's credit cards were frozen, and yet she still believed she possessed the superior bargaining position. She genuinely thought discounting the extortion price by $15,000 was an act of profound maternal grace. She expected me to pay a premium just to sit in the background and watch my sister shine. I did not sigh. I did not laugh. I simply absorbed the vast, gaping canyon of her delusion. "Enjoy your wedding," I said. I pressed the red icon on the screen terminating the call. I opened the contact settings menu on my device. I selected Susan's profile and tapped the block function. I repeated the action for Richard. I executed the same command for Vanessa. The digital barricade was now secure. They could no longer reach me. I stood up and walked into my master bedroom. The time for observation had ended. It was time to assume my position on the board. I reached to the top shelf of my walk-in closet and retrieved a black full-grain leather weekender bag. The brass hardware clinked softly as I set it on the mattress. I packed with deliberate, unhurried precision. I selected a pair of tailored charcoal trousers, a crisp white silk blouse, and a structured blazer. I added a cashmere sleep set and a minimal toiletry kit. I was not preparing to attend a family celebration. I was outfitting myself for a corporate oversight expedition. Every item I placed into the bag reinforced the boundary between the daughter they tried to exploit and the executive who owned their destination. I zipped the leather duffel shut, the interlocking metal teeth securing my belongings. I slung the strap over my shoulder, grabbed my keys, and exited the penthouse. I rode the elevator down to the subterranean garage, my footsteps echoing against the concrete as I walked to my vehicle. The drive out of Delaware offered a physical transition to match the psychological one. I merged onto the southbound interstate, leaving the dense, claustrophobic suburbs of Wilmington behind in the rearview mirror. The afternoon traffic flowed smoothly, carrying me toward the Maryland border. The landscape gradually shifted from commercial retail sprawl to wide, sweeping expanses of coastal marshland and thick evergreen forests. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the subtle vibration of the road beneath my tires. The air inside the cabin felt charged, humming with an electric anticipation. For 34 years, my physical movements were dictated by their schedule. Holiday dinners, where I was seated at the far end of the table, forced country club appearances, where I was ignored, mandatory birthday celebrations honoring the golden child. Today, I was driving toward a destination they desperately needed, holding the ultimate authority over their access. Memories of childhood road trips flashed through my mind. Sitting in the back seat of Richard's sedans, watching the back of his head while he praised Vanessa for a mediocre report card. They never looked in the rearview mirror to check on me. Now they were the ones falling behind, fading into the distance while I steered the course. The sun began to dip below the horizon as I crossed the state line. The sky transitioned into deep hues of indigo and bruised purple. The fading light cast long, dramatic shadows across the asphalt. I took the final highway exit, navigating the winding two-lane coastal road that hugged the shoreline. The scent of saltwater and pine needles filtered through the climate control vents. Up ahead, a discreet stone marker indicated the private turnoff for the property. I steered my vehicle onto the crushed white gravel driveway of the Whitehaven estate. The tires crunched rhythmically, announcing my arrival. The heavy wrought iron gates stood open, flanked by tall brick pillars. I drove past the entrance, following the winding path through the ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The main mansion emerged from the tree line just after dusk. Ground-level spotlights illuminated the pristine limestone facade, casting a warm, regal glow against the darkening sky. The expansive topiary garden stretched out toward the waterfront, perfectly manicured and waiting for an event that would never happen. The sheer scale of the property was breathtaking, a testament to the quiet empire I had built while my family squandered their legacy. I bypassed the guest parking lot and steered toward the secluded staff entrance near the rear of the estate. A single figure stood waiting under the warm glow of a brass carriage lantern. Sterling, the general manager, wore a tailored navy suit and held a leather folio tucked under his arm. I parked the car, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The coastal breeze rustled the leaves above us. "Good evening, Miss Palmer," Sterling said, offering a crisp, professional nod. "Welcome to your property." "Good evening, Sterling," I replied, retrieving my leather bag from the passenger seat. "Give me the current status report." Sterling opened his folio and extracted a heavy brass keyring, passing it to me along with the digital access card. "These are the master keys for the owner's suite on the 3rd floor. The quarters have been fully prepped for your stay." I pocketed the keys, feeling the weight of the brass against my palm. "And the billing ledger for tomorrow's event?" I asked. Sterling flipped to the second page in his folder. The noon deadline expired without any successful communication from the client. At 12:15, our merchant bank registered an incoming wire transfer attempt for the full $75,000 balance. The origin account belonged to a local Wilmington credit union. My parents had scrambled. They found a secondary account, likely draining a minor retirement fund or taking out a predatory personal loan at the 11th hour. "The transaction did not clear," Sterling continued, his tone flat and factual. "The originating institution flagged the transfer due to insufficient liquid funds. The wire bounced. We received the formal denial code at 1:30 this afternoon. Richard and Susan failed to secure the necessary capital. Their financial house of cards had finally collapsed under the weight of Vanessa's demands. The credit pipelines were dry, the bridge loans were denied, and their last-ditch effort imploded upon contact with the banking server. "The contract is officially void," Sterling stated. "We are under no legal obligation to provide services or grant access to the premises. I have already dismissed the auxiliary kitchen staff and canceled the valet schedule for tomorrow. The private security team is briefed and will arrive on site at 6 in the morning." I looked up at the towering limestone walls of the mansion. The grand ballroom windows were dark, the sprawling lawns were empty, the silence of the estate was profound, untouched by the frantic panic surely unfolding 2 hours north in Delaware. My sister went to sleep tonight dreaming of white peacocks and string quartets, entirely unaware that her venue contract was a worthless piece of paper. Sterling closed his leather folio. "How would you like us to handle the perimeter tonight?" he asked. I turned back to the general manager, my gaze sweeping past him toward the distant entrance of the property. The wrought iron gates stood as the final barrier between their delusions and my reality. "Lock the main gates at midnight," I ordered. "Disable the electronic keypad. Terminate all vendor access codes. When the sun comes up tomorrow, nobody sets foot on this property." "Understood," Sterling said, bowing his head slightly. "Have a restful evening." I took my bag and walked through the private entrance, stepping into the quiet, echoing halls of my estate. The transition was complete. I arrived as the landlord, and tomorrow I would watch the eviction. Saturday morning broke over the Maryland coastline with a brilliant, piercing clarity. I woke up, enveloped in the plush, heavy duvet of the owner's suite. The 2,000-square-foot sanctuary stretched out around me in quiet majesty. Vaulted ceilings trimmed in gold leaf arched above the California king bed. The flooring beneath my bare feet transitioned from thick woven rugs to heated marble tiles as I made my way toward the integrated kitchenette. I selected a dark roast pot and engaged the brass espresso machine. The mechanical whir provided the only sound in the vast chamber. The rich, earthy aroma of brewing coffee filled the air, grounding me in the present moment. I poured the dark liquid into a ceramic demitasse and walked toward the expansive French doors. Pushing the glass panes open, I stepped out onto the private stone balcony. The crisp, cool morning air washed over my face, carrying the faint scent of salt spray from the nearby Atlantic. Below me, the meticulously manicured grounds of the Whitehaven estate lay bathed in the soft, golden light of dawn. The geometric topiary garden stretched endlessly toward the waterfront. The pristine white walkways remained entirely empty. The sheer silence of the property was intoxicating. There were no delivery trucks backing into the loading docks, no frantic event coordinators shouting orders over walkie-talkies, no florists rushing to arrange thousands of imported hydrangeas before the photographer arrived. The estate stood frozen in peaceful perfection. This profound quiet was the ultimate luxury purchased and secured by my own disciplined labor. I took a slow sip of the high-end espresso. The bitter, complex flavors danced on my tongue. The conflict within me shifted from strategic planning to a sharp, electric anticipation. Somewhere roughly an hour north in Delaware, my sister was currently waking up in a frenzy. Vanessa would be surrounded by a chaotic swarm of makeup artists, hairstylists, and fawning bridesmaids. She was likely wearing a monogrammed silk robe, sipping cheap Prosecco and snapping photographs to document her mythical fairy tale. Susan was undoubtedly pacing a hotel suite, barking demands at the bridal party and ensuring the Whitmore family felt properly revered. They believed they were preparing for the crowning achievement of their social climbing careers. They operated under the assumption that the venue staff was currently fluffing chair covers and icing champagne down in Maryland. They had no idea they were marching straight toward a brick wall. I leaned my forearms against the cool stone balustrade and looked out over the tree line. My thoughts drifted to the stark contrast between this sprawling suite and the cramped, dark hallway of my childhood home. Whenever Richard and Susan hosted their dinner parties, they relegated me to the upstairs guest room, instructing me to remain out of sight so I would not disrupt their carefully curated aesthetic. I was the serious, quiet daughter who ruined the mood. They preferred the sparkling, performative obedience of the golden child. Now the dynamic was permanently inverted. I stood on the balcony of a multi-million-dollar property I owned outright, while they prepared to beg for entry at the gates. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last wisps of coastal fog. The brass gears of the grandfather clock in the adjacent sitting room began to turn. The deep, resonant chimes struck 7 times. A firm, rhythmic knock echoed from the heavy mahogany double doors leading to the main corridor. I set my empty ceramic cup on a glass side table and walked across the suite. I unlatched the brass deadbolt and pulled the door inward. Sterling stood in the hallway. His posture was impeccably straight, his gray suit perfectly tailored for a day of corporate oversight. He held a sleek digital tablet resting on his left forearm. His expression remained a mask of professional detachment, but a faint spark of adrenaline glinted in his eyes. "The bride's party is at the front gate, ma'am," Sterling announced. His voice was a hushed, steady baritone that carried no trace of sympathy. "Their access codes have been disabled." He extended the tablet toward me. I looked down at the high-definition security feed streaming from the perimeter cameras. A long convoy of luxury vehicles sat idling on the gravel shoulder of the coastal highway. A massive white stretch limousine anchored the front of the line, flanked by several black SUVs. I could clearly see the silhouette of a woman wearing a white veil, pacing frantically near the wrought iron bars. A man in a tuxedo, likely my father, was jabbing his finger repeatedly into the electronic call box. The lockout was no longer a theoretical concept written on a spreadsheet. It was a tangible, breathing reality unfolding at the edge of my property line. The physical barrier held firm against their mounting panic. "What are your orders?" Sterling asked, pulling the tablet back to his side. I kept my posture relaxed, leaning slightly against the mahogany doorframe. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt the profound satisfaction of an auditor watching a fraudulent ledger balance out to zero. Inform them of the cancellation strictly by the book I instructed. Send the private security detail down the driveway to meet them at the perimeter. Do not allow anyone to step foot past the stone pillars. State clearly that the event is permanently voided due to a critical breach of contract and severe non-payment. Sterling nodded, tapping a confirmation command into his screen. The event coordinator, Jillian, is demanding to speak with the ownership group. She claims this is a simple banking error that can be rectified with a quick phone call. There will be no phone calls, I replied. Hand Richard a printed copy of the bounced wire transfer. Make sure it is printed on our official corporate letterhead. Let him look down at his own financial failure in front of the groom's family. Let the Whitmores see exactly what kind of dynasty they are marrying into. I will deliver the documentation personally, Sterling said. Shall I have security escort you down to the entrance? It might be prudent if you wish to address the client directly. I shook my head, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. I will not give them the satisfaction of a face-to-face confrontation. They thrive on dramatic arguments and emotional manipulation. If I go down there, they will attempt to bargain cry and twist the narrative to make themselves the victims of a cruel sister. I am stripping them of their audience. I stepped back into the suite, preparing to close the door. Do not mention my name, I added. Do not indicate that I am anywhere near this estate. You are speaking on behalf of Apex Hospitality Group. I will remain up here. Sterling inclined his head in silent understanding and turned to walk down the long, carpeted corridor. I shut the heavy doors and engaged the deadbolt. I walked past the king bed and entered the private media room attached to the master suite. A bank of flat-screen monitors covered the far wall, providing real-time visual feeds from every security camera on the sprawling acreage. I picked up the remote control and isolated the front gate feed, casting it onto the largest central screen. I sank into a plush leather armchair, crossing my legs. I was a ghost in the machine, hovering high above the wreckage they had brought upon themselves. For 34 years they demanded I pay the admission fee to participate in their manufactured lives. Today, I was broadcasting the collapse of their empire from the comfort of my own theater. I watched the screen intently as Sterling and two broad-shouldered security guards began their long walk down the gravel driveway toward the frantic crowd gathered at the iron bars. The real show was about to begin. The high-definition pixels of the central monitor illuminated the dark media room. I leaned forward in the plush leather armchair, watching the silent theater unfold at the perimeter of my property. The security feed provided a pristine, unblinking view of the wrought iron gates. Outside those heavy black bars, a logistical nightmare was rapidly expanding across the narrow shoulder of the coastal highway. Vanessa stood at the center of the asphalt, a stark white focal point against the gray road. She wore a custom silk dressing gown, the delicate fabric whipped around her legs in the coastal morning breeze. A cathedral-length veil was already pinned into her hair, trailing behind her in the dust and exhaust fumes. She slammed her palm against the metal casing of the intercom box. Her face, usually poised and camera-ready, contorted into a mask of unfiltered rage. She was shouting, her mouth moving in frantic, jagged shapes. She expected the heavy gates to swing inward on command. Instead, they remained unyielding, a physical manifestation of her depleted leverage. Behind her, the commercial reality of her unpaid invoices idled on the roadside. A convoy of refrigerated delivery trucks stretched down the asphalt. Caterers sat in their elevated cabs, arms crossed over their steering wheels, waiting for a green light that would never come. Two floral transport vans blocked the right lane, their hazard lights blinking in rhythmic amber flashes. The vendors were working professionals who required verified capital before unloading their inventory. They recognized a default scenario when they saw one. A black, stretched limousine pulled into the chaotic line of vehicles. The rear door swung open before the driver could even put the engine in park. Richard and Susan emerged onto the dusty road. My father wore a traditional black tuxedo, the stiff white collar pressing into his reddening neck. My mother clutched a silver-beaded handbag, her steps faltering as she took in the spectacle of the blocked entrance. They rented the oversized luxury vehicle to project an image of boundless prosperity. Now it served as a very expensive waiting room on the side of a public highway. Richard marched toward the gate, pushing past his hysterical daughter. He squared his shoulders, adopting the same faux executive posture he used to intimidate waitstaff and junior loan officers. He pointed a rigid finger at the intercom, mouthing demands. He still operated under the delusion that volume and authority could override a binding financial contract. He thought he could bully the architecture itself into submission. On the inside of the property line, Sterling walked into the frame. Two broad-shouldered security guards flanked the general manager, their tactical uniforms a sharp contrast to the lavish wedding attire outside. Sterling stopped exactly 3 feet from the iron bars. He did not raise his hands. He did not flinch at the shouting. He maintained the serene, detached posture of a professional executing a corporate directive. I zoomed the camera feed in, focusing tight on the exchange. Sterling retrieved a crisp sheet of white paper from his leather folio. He extended his arm, passing the document through a narrow gap in the ironwork. Richard snatched the paper. I watched my father's eyes dart across the printed text. The document was the formal denial of the wire transfer, printed on official Apex Hospitality letterhead. It detailed the exact banking error: insufficient liquid funds. But more importantly, it listed the origin routing digits. Richard recognized those numbers instantly. It was the account he tried to drain the pipeline I froze and permanently sealed. The visual transformation of Richard Palmer was immediate and profound. The rigid executive posture dissolved into thin air. His shoulders slumped forward, the fabric of his tuxedo jacket bunching around his neck. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He looked down at the asphalt, the crisp paper trembling in his hand. He realized he was ruined. The financial safety net was gone, and his name was formally attached to a bounced check for $75,000. Susan grabbed his arm, shaking him, demanding to know what the paper said. Richard could not even speak. He just handed her the document. My mother read the text and physically stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The fabricated empire they built over 10 years crashed to the ground in a matter of seconds. The drama escalated as a sleek midnight blue town car bypassed the line of delivery trucks and pulled directly up to the front of the gates. The driver hurried around to open the rear doors. Bradley stepped out onto the gravel. The groom wore a tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly coiffed for a political photo op. His parents followed closely behind him. The Whitmores carried the effortless, understated grace of true generational wealth. They surveyed the flashing hazard lights, the idling commercial trucks, and the frantic bride standing in the dust. The patriarch of the Whitmore family checked his watch, his expression hardening into a mask of severe disapproval. This was a family that built their legacy on order, reputation, and public dignity. They were currently standing in the middle of a roadside circus. Bradley walked briskly toward Vanessa. He held his hands out, his brow furrowed, as he asked what was delaying the procession. The microphone on the exterior intercom was still active, picking up the ambient audio and feeding it directly into my media room. "There is just a minor clerical error," Vanessa cried, her voice echoing through the speakers in my suite. Her tone was shrill, laced with a desperate need to maintain the illusion in front of her future in-laws. "The bank made a mistake with the routing numbers. My father is sorting it out right now. It is just a misunderstanding with the venue management." She reached out to grab Bradley's arm, forcing a frantic, brittle smile. She tried to sell the lie. She hoped the Whitmores would simply nod and wait for the imaginary glitch to be resolved. Sterling did not allow the deception to breathe. He stood his ground behind the iron bars, his voice carrying the calm, carrying projection of a man accustomed to commanding large rooms. "This is not a clerical error," Sterling stated loudly. The audio feed captured his words with crystal clarity. The final invoice of $75,000 was returned by the originating institution due to insufficient funds. The contract is permanently voided. Apex Hospitality Group does not extend credit for luxury events. You must clear the entrance immediately. The words hung in the humid morning air, heavy and inescapable. Insufficient funds. The phrase struck the Whitmore family like a physical blow. Bradley's mother gasped, taking a deliberate step backward, creating physical distance between herself and Susan. The groom's father narrowed his eyes, his gaze shifting from the panicked face of his future daughter-in-law to the trembling hands of Richard Palmer. The political dynasty realized they had been conned. They were not merging with a family of equal standing. They were attaching their pristine public name to a sinking ship of leveraged debt and empty bank accounts. Bradley pulled his arm away from Vanessa. He looked at her not with love or concern, but with profound embarrassment. The carefully constructed facade of the wealthy Wilmington heiress shattered into a million irreparable pieces on the shoulder of a Maryland highway. Vanessa dropped to her knees on the gravel, the custom silk gown absorbing the dirt and oil of the road. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing heavily. Richard and Susan stood frozen, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their public humiliation. I watched the devastating tableau unfold on the high-definition monitor. My pulse remained steady. I felt no pity. They designed this trap for me, intending to use my resources to fund this very moment while discarding me in the shadows. The trap simply caught the architects instead. I leaned back in the leather chair, letting the reality of their destruction wash over me. The physical confrontation outside the gates was concluded. The venue was secure. Now it was time to address the digital battleground they created. It was time to deliver the final psychological strike. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my personal phone, opening the camera application. The stage was perfectly set for a definitive visual statement. I minimized the security application on my device. The camera lens iris blinked open, adjusting to the bright ambient light filtering into the media room. I pushed myself out of the plush leather armchair. My bare feet padded silently across the heated marble tiles, carrying me away from the glowing wall of surveillance monitors. I walked back toward the expansive glass doors of the master suite. The digital clock on the bedside table read exactly 8:30. I pushed the French doors wide. The crisp morning breeze swept through the opening, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from the gardens below. I stepped onto the stone balcony. The sun sat higher now, bathing the Maryland coastline in a brilliant, warm radiance. The limestone facade of the estate formed a majestic backdrop. Vanessa had mailed hundreds of glossy, expensive invitations, featuring a custom watercolored rendering of this exact architectural angle. Every relative in our sprawling family tree recognized those distinct marble colonnades and the sweeping slate roofline. They spent months idolizing this structure, treating it as the ultimate symbol of Palmer family ascension. I raised my smartphone, reversing the lens to activate the front-facing camera. I positioned myself near the stone balustrade. I ensured the iconic central tower of the mansion filled the upper left quadrant of the frame. In my right hand, I held the ceramic demi-tasse cup, the dark espresso, offering a casual, effortless prop. I looked at my reflection on the high-definition screen. My hair fell in loose, relaxed waves, my silk sleep set draped elegantly over my shoulders. I did not look like the bitter, jealous spinster they spent the week tearing apart in their digital echo chamber. I looked like a woman who owned the world. I offered the camera a soft, genuine smile. My thumb tapped the shutter button. A digital click captured the image. I reviewed the photograph. The contrast was poetic. Behind me, the serene, empty perfection of the topiary gardens stretched toward the water. Just beyond the tree line, invisible in the shot but agonizingly close in reality, my sister was currently kneeling in the dirt, weeping on the shoulder of a public highway. I opened the messaging application. I navigated to the Palmer Family Accountability group thread. The chat log remained filled with their toxic demands from the previous days. Judgments, insults, declarations of my moral failure. I attached the high-resolution photograph to the empty text field. I tapped the keyboard, composing the caption with deliberate, measured strokes. Peaceful morning at my new property. Hard work pays off. I did not add any emojis. I did not include any hashtags or exclamation points. The raw truth required no embellishment. I pressed send. A soft swoosh sounded from the speaker as the data packet uploaded to the cellular network. I watched the image render inside the group chat, a vibrant, glowing rectangle sitting directly beneath Aunt Barbara's last, furious demand for my compliance. I did not stop there. I opened my primary social media profiles and broadcast the same photograph and caption to my public feeds. I ensured the location tag boldly displayed the Whitehaven estate. Then I switched the physical toggle on the side of my device, muting all incoming audio notifications. I set the phone flat on the wrought iron patio table and took another sip of my coffee. I did not look away from the screen. The psychological strike was deployed. Now I waited for the shockwave to detonate. The delivery indicators beneath the image transitioned from gray check marks to solid blue-red receipts in rapid succession. One by one, the digital avatars of my extended family members illuminated at the bottom of the thread. Uncle David saw it. Cousin Tyler read the text. Aunt Barbara opened the image. I imagined the cognitive dissonance paralyzing them in their respective living rooms across the country. They were staring at an impossible paradox. The outcast daughter, the woman they labeled a financial parasite, was casually lounging on the private balcony of the very estate where the golden child was supposed to be hosting the event of the decade. The caption clearly stated ownership. 3 gray typing bubbles appeared simultaneously at the bottom of the screen. The dots pulsed in a frantic, uneven rhythm. Aunt Barbara was attempting to draft a response. Her typing indicator vanished, reappeared, and vanished again. She was struggling to process the visual evidence. The narrative Richard constructed for them was disintegrating before their eyes. Cousin Jessica, who was currently standing near the locked gates in a ruined bridesmaid dress, triggered a read receipt. Her avatar popped up on my screen. She had cellular service on the highway. She was looking at the photo of me sipping espresso while she sweltered in the morning humidity outside my walls. The group chat, previously a synchronized chorus of condemnation, descended into pure, silent chaos. Nobody sent a coherent reply. The typing bubbles kept surfacing and drowning a digital manifestation of their systemic failure. They could not reconcile the reality of my wealth with the fiction of their superiority. A new notification banner slid across the top of my screen. A direct message from Jessica. Donatella, what is happening? Are you inside the gates? Why is the manager saying the contract is voided? Her punctuation was non-existent, a symptom of her rising panic. I swiped the banner away without opening the message. The panic was spreading like a virus through their ranks. Another banner appeared. This one belonged to Uncle David. Is this a joke, Donatella? Richard said the bank made an error. The facade was cracking wide open. The relatives were beginning to compare notes. Richard told the family a banking glitch delayed the entry, but my photograph proved I was inside, holding the keys, claiming ownership. The conflicting realities collided, generating a shockwave of distrust among the enablers. The narrative tension shifted away from the physical lockout. The dust settling on the highway was nothing compared to the psychological devastation taking root in their minds. They realized they spent the entire week defending a fraud while alienating a titan. They hurled insults at the sole proprietor of the venue they desperately needed to access. I watched the screen as the first incoming call registered. The caller ID flashed Richard Palmer. My father was standing on the asphalt, his reputation in tatters, watching his future in-laws drive away in disgust. He had just looked at his phone and seen the selfie. He finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. He realized the silent partner behind Apex Hospitality Group was the daughter he tried to extort. I did not answer. I let the call ring out in silence. The screen went dark for a fraction of a second before lighting up again. Susan was calling. Then Vanessa. Then Richard again. The missed call counter began to climb with terrifying speed. The digital barrage was relentless. The power dynamic had inverted so drastically that their only remaining strategy was sheer, unadulterated desperation. I leaned back in my chair, watching the numbers tick upward, knowing the true fallout was only just beginning. I left the device resting on the polished mahogany nightstand. The screen pulsed continuously, a silent strobe light in the otherwise tranquil room. I turned my back to the flashing notifications and walked toward the master ensuite. The heavy oak doors glided open, revealing a sanctuary crafted from imported travertine and brushed nickel. I twisted the brass dials inside the walk-in shower enclosure. Multiple jets sprang to life, enveloping the space in thick, fragrant steam. I stepped under the cascading water. The temperature was perfectly calibrated, hot enough to loosen the muscles in my neck and wash away the residual tension of the past decade. For years I carried the invisible weight of their expectations. I was the designated scapegoat for their financial incompetence, the quiet daughter, expected to fade into the wallpaper while they exhausted their resources on the golden child. As the hot water cascaded over my shoulders, that burden dissolved and swirled down the brass drain. I took my time, using artisan soaps that smelled of cedar and bergamot. The contrast between my current environment and the roadside disaster unfolding outside my gates was stark and deeply satisfying. They were sweating in the morning humidity, breathing in diesel exhaust and road dust, while I stood in a private spa built by my own disciplined labor. My wealth was not inherited. It was not a phantom trust fund or predatory loan. It was concrete forged through years of forensic audits and shrewd investments. And now, that concrete reality was the impenetrable wall standing between them and their salvation. After 30 minutes, I turned off the valves. I wrapped myself in a thick Egyptian cotton robe and secured the belt tight around my waist. The steam clung to the expansive mirrors as I walked back into the main bedroom. The digital clock on the dresser now read 9:15. I approached the nightstand and picked up my smartphone. The lock screen displayed a staggering metric: 79 missed calls. The number sat there, bold and undeniable. 79 desperate attempts to bridge the chasm they created. Below the missed call counter, a waterfall of text messages crowded the display. The sheer volume of data required me to scroll for several seconds just to reach the beginning of their meltdown. The chronological progression of their messages provided a fascinating psychological case study. The initial texts, sent just after my photograph landed in the chat, were fueled by blind rage and lingering arrogance. "Donatella, let us in, right now," Richard commanded at 8:32. "Stop playing these childish games and tell the guards to open the perimeter. We have guests arriving in an hour." 3 minutes later, confusion began to override the anger. "Are you actually inside?" Vanessa typed. "Why did you post that picture? Tell the manager we are out here. This is not funny anymore." By 8:40, the reality of the caption had finally penetrated their defenses. The tone shifted drastically. "You bought Whitehaven?" Susan asked. The text lacked any punctuation, radiating pure shock. How is this possible? Please call me back. We need to talk. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the crushing realization that their extortion target was actually their landlord. The boulder crashed down upon them with unforgiving gravity. Less than 2 days ago, they sat at a marble kitchen island and demanded $35,000, treating me like a lowly subordinate who owed them a toll for simply existing in the same bloodline. Now they were standing in the dirt, begging for entry into a $75,000 venue they had no legal right to inhabit. The power dynamic inverted so rapidly, it left them grasping at thin air. They realized the sister they mocked as a glorified calculator owned the very ground they needed to walk on. I noticed a single audio file resting at the bottom of the feed. A voice note from my mother, recorded 3 minutes ago. I tapped the play icon and raised the speaker to my ear. Susan was weeping. The polished country club matriarch persona was gone, replaced by the raw, ragged gasps of a woman watching her social standing burn to the ground. The background noise of the recording painted a chaotic picture. I could hear the roar of heavy diesel engines, the crunch of tires on gravel, and the distinct sound of Vanessa wailing in the distance. "Donatella, please," Susan pleaded between heavy sobs. "I am begging you. Open the gates. Bradley's parents are furious. They are threatening to call off the wedding. Right now. They call us frauds, Donatella. They know the check bounced. Richard is having a panic attack. Vanessa is hyperventilating on the ground. Please, just tell the guards to let us inside. We will do whatever you want. We are sorry. Just fix it." The audio clipped and ended, leaving a profound silence in my bedroom. I did not type a reply. I did not send a single character of validation or forgiveness. Silence remained my most lethal weapon. Answering them would invite negotiation. It would imply that their tears held currency, that their apologies could purchase salvation. True power does not explain itself. True power simply exists, unmovable and deaf to the pleas of those who squandered their goodwill. I set the phone face down on the glass side table, severing the digital cord. I tightened the knot on my robe and walked back into the media room. I sank into the leather armchair and focused my attention on the central surveillance monitor. The situation outside the perimeter had deteriorated significantly during my shower. The visual evidence of the cancellation was cementing itself into a harsh physical reality. The lead catering truck, a large white commercial van carrying the bespoke menu Vanessa bragged about, was executing a slow, cumbersome three-point turn on the narrow highway. The driver had received his orders from his dispatch office. No payment meant no service. The truck aligned itself with the northbound lane and accelerated away from the estate, taking the expensive appetizers and the imported champagne with it. The floral transport vans followed suit. The amber hazard lights blinked as they merged back into traffic, hauling away thousands of white hydrangeas. A smaller transport vehicle, hitched to a trailer, carrying the rented white peacocks, executed a tight maneuver and sped off toward the horizon. The vendors were seasoned professionals. They cut their losses the moment a contract defaulted. With every departing vehicle, a piece of the grand illusion vanished. Vanessa was sitting in the dirt, leaning against the stone pillar of the gate. Her cathedral-length veil lay discarded in the weeds trampled by the tires of the departing caterers. Richard was arguing heatedly with a man who looked like the limousine driver, likely fighting over an unpaid balance for the luxury rental. The sleek, midnight blue town car belonging to the Whitmore family was nowhere to be seen on the screen. Bradley and his politically connected parents had made good on their threat. They abandoned the roadside spectacle to distance their pristine reputation from the Palmer family collapse. The groom was gone. The wedding was over before a single guest could arrive. I watched the caterer's taillights disappear around the bend. The highway shoulder was now mostly empty, leaving only my ruined family standing in the dust. The physical standoff was effectively over. They could not force their way through iron and stone, but my father was a desperate man, and desperate men, cornered by crippling debt, always searched for a legal loophole. He knew he could not appeal to me emotionally, so he would attempt to attack the corporate structure that locked him out. A sharp notification chimed on my encrypted business terminal across the room. It was a high-priority alert from Harrison, my lead corporate litigator. The opposing counsel was initiating formal contact. The frantic, desperate negotiation phase was about to commence, and my legal armor was already strapped in place. The digital clock on the encrypted terminal flipped to 10:00. Precisely on schedule, the secure communications software chimed, indicating an incoming video conference from Harrison. I tapped the keyboard to accept the connection. My lead litigator appeared on the high-definition monitor, seated in his sleek Philadelphia office, looking as sharp and unbothered as ever. "Good morning, Donatella," Harrison began, his tone brisk and strictly professional. "I just concluded a rather chaotic telephone conversation with a man named Lawson. He represents your father." "Give me the summary," I said, leaning closer to the microphone. Lawson sounded incredibly strained. Harrison explained, adjusting a stack of printed dossiers on his glass desk. "Richard is attempting to negotiate an emergency settlement. They offered to sign a promissory note, pledging the Wilmington property as collateral, along with a high-interest payment plan. They want us to authorize immediate entry to the estate and allow the vendors to return." Richard always operated under the assumption that every boundary was negotiable. During my childhood, I watched him bulldoze local contractors, delaying payments for months by having his lawyers threaten costly litigation. He treated municipal attorneys and small business owners with profound disrespect, assuming his fabricated social status granted him immunity from standard collection practices. He thought he could apply those same bullying tactics to Apex Hospitality Group. "What was your response?" I asked, knowing Harrison already executed my directives flawlessly. "I informed Mr. Lawson that our firm does not operate as a predatory lending institution," Harrison replied, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I stated clearly that Apex Hospitality rejects payment plans for defaulted premium luxury contracts. The invoice required full liquidation by noon yesterday. Since the wire bounced, the venue remains closed, non-negotiable." "How did Lawson react to the rejection?" I inquired, tracing the edge of my mahogany desk. "He attempted to escalate the rhetoric, threatening a bad faith lawsuit," Harrison noted, flipping open the top dossier. That provided the perfect segue to deliver the secondary payload. The tension in the media room thickened. The venue cancellation was merely the initial strike. The true devastation lay in the underlying criminal exposure. "I advised Lawson to tread very carefully before initiating any civil litigation," Harrison continued. "I formally notified him that our internal security division is currently auditing the fraudulent transaction attempted on Tuesday afternoon. I provided him with the IP address logs, the timestamp, and the origin routing data connecting the failed $35,000 wire transfer directly to Richard's home network." I watched Harrison turn the page. I clarified that since the attempted theft crossed state lines, it falls under federal wire fraud jurisdiction, Harrison said. "I suggested Lawson inform his client that our holding company is preparing to forward this cyber fraud dossier to the appropriate federal authorities." The silence on the video feed stretched for a few seconds. The introduction of federal prison time altered the entire landscape of their nightmare. Lawson stopped talking immediately, Harrison added. He stammered something about needing to confer with his client and terminated the call. "Your father is no longer fighting for a wedding venue, Donatella. He is fighting to stay out of a federal indictment." "Excellent work, Harrison," I said. "Keep the legal barricade standing strong. Do not accept any further calls from Lawson today." I severed the video connection. The glowing screen faded to black. Richard now carried the full, crushing weight of his actions. He stood on the side of a Maryland highway, abandoned by his wealthy future-in-laws, and suddenly staring down the barrel of a federal fraud investigation. The fabricated Wilmington dynasty was reduced to ashes in less than 3 hours. I stood up and walked back into the master bedroom. The humid morning air still drifted through the open balcony doors. My personal smartphone rested exactly where I left it, on the glass side table. The screen remained dark, the blocked contacts keeping the device blissfully quiet. Suddenly, the phone vibrated. A bright white incoming call screen shattered the calm. The caller ID displayed an unknown local Maryland number. It was not Richard. It was not Susan. It was not Vanessa. I knew precisely what was happening. When cornered narcissists lose their primary communication channels, they commandeer the resources of those trapped around them. One of the stranded bridesmaids had offered her device to the weeping bride. I picked up the phone. I did not feel angry. I felt an immense, tranquil clarity. I swiped the green icon and brought the speaker to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice steady and low. "Donatella, you have to stop this right now," Vanessa shrieked. Her voice blasted through the receiver, shrill and ragged. The pristine, airy cadence she utilized at the marble kitchen island was entirely obliterated. She sounded like a frantic, terrified child. The background noise painted a vivid picture of the roadside misery. Cars whizzed past on the coastal highway, their tires humming against the pavement. Someone was crying in the distance. "You have to let us in," Vanessa sobbed, her breath hitching uncontrollably. Bradley left, his parents drove away, the caterers are gone, you ruined everything. You planned this just to destroy my life. I walked toward the French doors, looking out over the empty, sunlit topiary gardens of my estate. "You destroyed your own life, Vanessa," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "You signed a contract you could never afford. You demanded luxuries you had no right to consume. I simply enforced the boundaries you chose to ignore." "But we are your family," she wailed, her voice cracking under the strain. "Family takes care of family. You have the money, you own this place, you are supposed to fix this for me. You cannot do this to your own sister." Family takes care of family. It was the eternal rallying cry of the Palmer household. For 34 years, they used that specific phrase as a weaponized shield. Whenever Vanessa maxed out a credit card, whenever she wrecked a vehicle, whenever she needed a bailout, they chanted those words. It meant everyone else absorbed the consequences of her reckless entitlement. It meant my resources belonged to her. They relied on that toxic philosophy to excuse their extortion. They believed biological proximity granted them unlimited access to my bank accounts. "I am not fixing anything," I stated. "Please, Donatella," she begged, the desperation stripping away every ounce of her pride. "Just open the gates. If we can just get inside and take the photos, maybe Bradley will come back. Maybe we can salvage the reception. I need you to do this for me." I let her frantic pleading hang in the air for a long moment. I thought back to Thursday evening. I remembered standing in the oppressive lemon-scented air of their colonial home. I remembered the sneer on her face as she tapped her French manicured finger against the gold wax seal of her wedding invoice. I remembered the condescending glare my father gave me when he told me I owed them my salary. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the salt air from the coast. "I am nothing without family money, remember?" I said, repeating my father's cruel words back into the receiver with icy precision. "Unfortunately, Vanessa, you are out of family money." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I tapped the red button. The line went dead. I opened the device settings, navigated to the recent calls log, and permanently blocked the bridesmaid's number. The emotional break was pristine, unyielding, and definitive. There were no lingering arguments. There was no closure beyond the harsh click of a disconnected line. I walked back out onto the stone balcony, leaning against the warm balustrade. The drama outside the gates was no longer my concern. The federal threat was deployed. The psychological severance was complete. Now, the sprawling consequences of their deception would begin to infect the rest of their carefully curated social circle. The guests who were promised a lavish weekend were about to arrive at an empty driveway, demanding answers from a family that had nothing left to give. The digital clock on the mahogany desk advanced to 1 in the afternoon. The coastal sun baked the Maryland landscape outside my windows, turning the sprawling topiary gardens into a bright canvas of green and gold. I sat in the quiet sanctuary of the owner's suite and opened the encrypted corporate portal. Sterling had just uploaded the final security incident report. The dossier detailed the exact sequence of events following my severed phone call with the weeping bride. According to the time-stamped logs, the groom did not merely drive away. His father, a man fiercely protective of his municipal political capital, placed a call to his crisis management team right from the leather back seat of their departing town car. They drafted a sterile press release, citing irreconcilable differences. The groom severed the engagement before their luxury vehicle even reached the interstate on-ramp. The powerful alliance my mother spent years cultivating dissolved into a brief, humiliating footnote in local political gossip. The marriage was permanently canceled. My attention shifted to the commercial damage documented in the file. The security tablet displayed a comprehensive list of the independent contractors who arrived at the gates this morning. The bespoke culinary team, the independent floral designers, the exotic animal handlers. These working-class professionals fronted significant capital to source the luxury goods my sister demanded. Under standard industry operating procedures, a defaulting client means the vendors absorb a devastating financial loss. Richard and Susan possessed zero liquidity to compensate them for their wasted labor and ruined inventory. I opened my primary banking interface. My parents' crimes should not bankrupt innocent local business owners. I cross-referenced the unpaid vendor invoices with the estate entry logs. I initiated a series of direct, expedited wire transfers from my personal proprietary funds. I covered the lost deposits for the caterers, the florists, and the specialty rental companies. I authorized a strict non-disclosure clause alongside the payments. The vendors received their rightful compensation, and my identity remained shielded. The innocent parties were made whole, isolating the suffering exclusively to the architects of the extortion. With the financial collateral damage mitigated, I picked up my smartphone. The blocked call log remained quiet, but the group messaging application provided a real-time window into the sprawling social collapse of the Wilmington dynasty. The thread titled Palmer Family Accountability was no longer an echo chamber of blind loyalty. It had mutated into an active, vicious digital war zone. Over 100 extended relatives, out-of-town guests, and family friends were currently stranded in expensive hotel blocks across the state line. They traveled hundreds of miles, purchased expensive formal wear, and booked non-refundable flights based on the promise of a lavish weekend. Now they demanded answers. Uncle David typed a furious paragraph demanding Richard explain why the venue gates were chained shut. He complained about the exorbitant cost of his suite and the profound humiliation of standing in a hotel lobby surrounded by confused guests. Cousin Tyler posted a screenshot of a brief social media update published by Bradley Whitmore. The groom officially announced the cancellation of the wedding, citing unforeseen ethical discrepancies. The political family wasted no time distancing their pristine brand from my father's toxic ledger. The phrase ethical discrepancies hung in the chat like a lit match in a powder keg. The relatives turned their collective rage toward the patriarch. The typing bubbles flooded the screen as aunts and cousins demanded financial reimbursement for their wasted travel expenses. They realized Richard lied about the banking glitch. They connected the dots between my morning photograph and the locked gates. The carefully constructed facade of the wealthy Palmer family was being dismantled, brick by brick, in the public square. Susan attempted to pacify the mob. She sent a lengthy text blaming the venue management, claiming a predatory corporation stole their deposit. Her lie fell flat. The relatives demanded proof. They demanded to see the receipts. The matriarch had no receipts to provide. Her social currency was bankrupt. I watched the digital implosion with cold detachment. For a decade, my parents utilized this exact network of relatives to isolate and control me. They deployed these people as attack dogs whenever I refused to comply with their financial demands. Now the dogs were turning on their handlers. The ensuing chaos was entirely a product of their own making. They built an empire on lies, and the truth was currently burning it to the ground. A new notification banner slid across the top of my screen. It was a direct, private message. The sender was Aunt Barbara, the woman who spent the entire week calling me bitter and demanding I hand over my salary to support the family name. I opened the separate chat window. Donatella Barbara wrote, her tone stripped of its previous self-righteous venom. I am so sorry. We did not know the truth. Richard told us you were being unreasonable. He lied to everyone about the finances. Please forgive me for the things I said. I hope you can find it in your heart to let us make amends. I read the text twice. It was a hollow apology born from the realization that she backed the losing side. She did not feel genuine remorse for her cruelty. She felt profound embarrassment because she insulted the sole proprietor of a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire. She wanted to realign her loyalty with the family member who actually possessed power and resources. I looked at the small read receipt indicator at the bottom of the screen. I did not type a response. I let the application register that I had seen her plea. I left the message unread, hanging in the digital void. I closed the chat window and deleted the conversation thread from my device. Forgiveness requires genuine accountability, and the Palmer family enablers were incapable of supplying it. The pebble of her apology dropped into a bottomless well, creating no ripples in my calm state of mind. I stood up from the mahogany desk and stretched my legs. The afternoon sun bathed the master suite in a warm, golden light. The air inside the room felt crisp and clear, devoid of the suffocating pressure that defined my life in Delaware. The sprawling consequences of the morning lockout were cascading through their social circles. The canceled wedding was merely the first domino. The exposure of their insolvency would trigger an unstoppable chain reaction. Creditors would notice the bounced checks. The private lenders would call in their high-interest bridge loans. The local politicians would sever all ties with Richard to protect their municipal standing. The country club board would inevitably quietly revoke their membership due to unpaid dues. The avalanche was in motion, and nothing could stop the descent. I walked back out onto the stone balcony. Below me, the estate grounds remained a testament to ordered tranquility. The white peacocks were gone. The catering trucks were miles away. The wrought iron gates stood firm, guarding a sanctuary that I built and protected with my own hands. I defeated their extortion not by engaging in a screaming match, but by elevating myself to a position where their demands could no longer reach me. As the late afternoon approached, the transition from crisis management to serene acceptance began. The physical confrontation ended on the side of the highway. The social destruction concluded in the group chat. The only remaining task was to observe the permanent restructuring of our respective lives. The drama peaked and shattered, leaving a clean, silent slate in its wake. My parents must return to Wilmington and face the ruins of their colonial mansion. Vanessa must unpack her ruined silk gown and confront a future devoid of the Whitmore political dynasty. The fallout belonged solely to them. September brought a crisp chill to the Delaware air. 30 days had passed since the iron gates locked shut on the Maryland coast. I sat at the heavy oak desk inside my downtown Wilmington penthouse. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass, illuminating the steam rising from my ceramic coffee cup. The environment felt transformed. The heavy-charged anticipation of August was gone. In its place resided a profound, quiet stability. I booted up the secure corporate terminal. My fingers tapped the keys, bringing the Apex Hospitality Group quarterly ledger onto the high-definition monitor. The Whitehaven estate portfolio loaded instantly. The financial metrics displayed on the screen were exceptional. The property had just concluded its most profitable 30-day cycle on record. Without the liability of delinquent clients clogging the calendar, our premium reservations surged. We booked 6 high-net-worth events in the past month alone. The revenue streams flowed seamlessly. The venue operated like a well-oiled machine, free from the chaotic gravity of my former family. The contrast between my expanding portfolio and the ruins of my parents' estate was stark. The fallout from the canceled wedding ripped through their curated social circles like a wildfire. Once the Whitmore family publicly distanced themselves, the invisible shield protecting Richard and Susan evaporated. Their creditors circled the colonial home in the suburbs. The local banks, realizing the Palmer dynasty was entirely insolvent, refused to extend any further lines of credit. The predatory bridge loan my father attempted to secure was denied permanently. They could not afford the exorbitant property taxes or the staggering mortgage payments. 3 weeks ago, a discreet moving truck arrived at their manicured driveway under the cover of darkness. They were forced to vacate the sprawling property they used as a stage for so many years. The colonial mansion went on the market as a short sale, snatched up by a corporate developer. Richard and Susan relocated to a cramped 2-bedroom, leased townhome on the industrial edge of the city. The faux crystal chandeliers and the mahogany wainscoting were left behind. They now lived in a space that reflected their actual net worth. Their country club memberships were quietly revoked due to unpaid dues. The invitations to local political galas ceased to arrive in their mailbox. They became social pariahs in the very community they spent a decade trying to conquer. There was no dramatic final confrontation between us. I did not visit the townhome. I did not send a letter of condolence. The silence I established on that highway remained unbroken. The boundary I set was a physical and psychological fortress. Vanessa experienced an equally harsh descent into reality. The cancellation of the wedding shattered her manufactured identity as a wealthy heiress. Bradley Whitmore never returned her phone calls. The political family erased her from their social media feeds, treating the engagement as an embarrassing clerical error they wished to forget. Left without a wealthy husband to fund her lifestyle, and with our parents unable to provide a daily subsidy, my sister faced a reality she spent 29 years avoiding. She had to secure employment. Through the local grapevine, I learned she accepted a mid-level retail management position at a high-end department store in a neighboring county. The irony was exquisite. The woman who once sneered at my career and called me a glorified calculator now spent her days standing on her feet for 8 hours folding cashmere sweaters and appeasing demanding customers. She wore a standard-issue black uniform instead of custom-imported silk. She answered to a regional director instead of giving orders to bespoke caterers. The protective bubble burst, exposing her to the unforgiving grind of the working class. She was learning the true value of a dollar by trading her time and labor to earn it. Every paycheck she received served as a quiet reminder of the empire she lost. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a slow sip of my dark roast coffee. The liquid was warm and grounding. The past month offered ample time to reflect on the nature of toxic obligation. Society often dictates that biological ties require endless sacrifice. We are taught to endure emotional extortion and financial drain under the guise of familial loyalty. My parents weaponized that philosophy, using it to demand a $35,000 ransom. They believed their shared DNA granted them unrestricted access to my proprietary wealth. They were wrong. True loyalty is reciprocal. It requires mutual respect, honesty, and a foundation of genuine care. When a family operates as a parasitic entity, draining the resources of one member to fund the delusions of another, the biological contract becomes null and void. Walking away was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of profound self-preservation. I dismantled their control by simply refusing to participate in their counterfeit production. I stopped funding the illusion. The guilt they tried to implant in my mind never materialized. The societal pressure to forgive toxic relatives is strong, but the reality of total peace outweighs it entirely. Every morning now began with this same tranquil ritual. There were no frantic phone calls demanding emergency wire transfers. There were no manipulative text messages guilting me into attending awkward social gatherings. The silence that replaced their constant demands was the most valuable asset I possessed. It was a currency that could never be depleted. I no longer spent my energy anticipating their next extortion attempt or guarding my assets against their schemes. That energy was now entirely my own, redirected into building my future and enjoying the present moment. The mental clarity achieved by walking away was worth far more than the $75,000 they begged me to surrender. The ultimate lesson solidified in my mind as I looked around the quiet luxury of my penthouse. For years I watched Richard tap the glass of his replica watch, pretending to hold the world in his palm. I watched Susan drape herself in cashmere she could not afford, desperate to prove her worth to strangers. They measured wealth in sprawling estates, country club memberships, and the ability to command obedience. They never understood the true definition of prosperity. True wealth is not measured in the square footage of a colonial home or the carat weight of a diamond ring. True wealth is found in the unyielding freedom to say no. It is the ability to look across a marble kitchen island at people who intend to bleed you dry and calmly walk out the front door without a single ounce of fear. I shifted my gaze to my secondary monitor. I opened my personal banking interface. The balances sat untouched, secure, and compounding steadily. The ledgers were pristine. No joint accounts, no authorized users, no hidden drains on my capital. The numbers represented decades of quiet discipline and unbreakable boundaries. I reached forward and closed the lid of my laptop. The screen went dark, plunging the desk into a serene shadow. The Delaware morning sun continued to climb, bathing the city below in a warm, vibrant light. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp autumn air. My mind was clear. My perimeter was secure. The story was over, leaving me in a state of unbothered, enduring peace.